Okay, so the world knows very little about the troublemaking Chinese women at the moment, but they are actually creating one of the most interesting and one of the few positive social changes in China at the moment. That is, of course, due to the background, because like the crackdown on any political movement in China has been so successful that, like, for example, human rights movement started by activists and as well as human rights lawyers. And then there is this, struggle in Xinjiang, Tibet, and etc., etc. But all these things are now kind of quiet down. But feminism movement in China is something very interesting because it's not happening in the traditional public sphere. It's somehow restricted. In the beginning, not so willingly, but now intentionally focused on the private sphere of the people. So that's why it's often ignored. But then it's creating certain things, very interesting things that international media start to pick up. New York Times starts to cover continuously about it. Actually, my podcast has been just covered by Wall Street Journal, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's, people do notice, international society do notice that, but then they don't know yet how to interpret it. So I'm gonna tell you stories today to show you what kind of interesting shift they have bring to the society, to the thinking of people. So my, I don't know how does that, I press this, yeah, here. It starts, of course, inevitably, it has to start from this rice rabbit thing. It's called Rice Rabbit because the Me Too movement in 2018, in the January, started in China. I mean, basically, it's a sort of echo of the Me Too movement in the US. A generation of young women, especially those starting from those who were well educated in the college, they started the Me Too in China. And that was Luo Qianqian from Beijing Aviation and Aerospace University. She accused her professor Chen Xiaowu of sexual harassment. Not only she was the victim, but there were other victims. So for some reason, like nobody could understand why, somehow that news just immediately become the top topic, trending topic of the social media at that time. And thousands of people, thousands of graduates from that university and also students from that university signed open letters to support her. And more than 70 universities participated also, I mean, not supporting Luo Qianqian, but also starting this Me Too kind of movement in their own university, demanding the university authorities to give more importance, like to establish these anti-sexual harassment procedures in the university. So that was, like nobody could predict it, but then it happened. It was a bomb in that year. And then, of course, the authorities somehow just get very nervous because university students ganging up is something that they try their best to avoid. With a memory that is still vivid from the 1989 students' movement on the Tiananmen Square. So they try their best to classify the students. And of course, the censorship department, censorship authority would very quickly start to take actions. So in the end, the word Me Too was very quickly censored from the social media. And to avoid that, of course, the netizens invented different words to bypass the censorship. And because me sounds like me, which is rice in Chinese, and tu is the rabbit, sounds like rabbit. So it's called rice rabbit in Chinese for a while, circulating, this word circulated in the social media. But then soon the rice rabbit cannot survive either. And then there were all sorts of other things coming up, like same with the humble me, 安也yang, which is a quote from from the gangster novel, one of the most famous 4 classics in Chinese, and etc., etc. So the word might not, the phrase might not survive, but then it's sort of transformed in different ways to keep on going. And even now, right now, you still see, after rounds and rounds of crackdown on this Me Too storytelling on the social media, I still see every now and then there are Me Too stories posted on the social media. But the difference is, of course, that now it's very difficult for them to gain public attention. And then after several rounds of crackdown, also the legal system, which I will talk about later, they would systematically reject this sort of cases and make it difficult for the victims to push forward what their demands. And but still, as I said, many interesting happened in the past 5 years. And so are the groups. I mean, there are 3 groups of feminists developed in the past 5 years. I categorize them into these 3 categories. Maybe other people have different way of categorizing them. So for me, it's very interesting. The first one is what I call communist feminists, which come from within the system, like university old school scholars who study feminism in the communist, under the communist guidance, which the older generation of feminism study scholars in China, they all belong to that. And you often see them, their characters are, they absolutely support the party's rule. They uphold traditional families, like heterosexual families, which they think is still a basic cell of the society, and they put a lot of stress on that. And then they still, of course, they demand equal rights for men and women, but within the current system only. So they are not that subversive. They're just like following the path of Marxism, sort of old school, but also under the Chinese Communist Party's rule kind of mentality. And this school of feminists are getting outdated. Like normally, I think their age is above like 50. And they are not really talking with the other 2 groups of feminists. They are mostly talking among themselves in the universities. And sometimes they exchange with other foreign scholars, but that's another thing. And then there are liberal feminists, which is the majority, I think, of the feminists in China. They uphold equal rights between men and women. They are with or without political affiliation. They can be, of course, also outside, because there are so many Chinese students studying abroad. Many of the young women, they are Chinese women, they are like liberal feminists. So sometimes they would also participate, for example, in the A4 paper revolution. Many of the feminists would also, liberal feminists would also participate in that to claim their position in a political movement with this identity as a feminist. So you see them in the US and UK a lot. And the other character they have is they uphold certain freedom of choices of lifestyle, which differentiate them from the last group, the radical feminists, which is the newest, but actually also oldest, because in ancient China, we also had radical feminists, even though they are named differently. So actually the newest group of feminists is the communist feminists. In Chinese history, you have liberal feminists, you have radical feminists, but you didn't have communist feminists. And the radical feminists, they uphold not equal rights, but they only care about women's rights because they think men already can care for their own rights already. The system the whole society, the legal system, everything, political system guarantee men's rights. So what need to be fought for is women's rights. And they uphold a sort of principle called 6B4T, which is introduced from Korean radical feminist movement. The fundamental rules are like renounce sex, child rearing, dating, basically have nothing to do with men, and not buying sexist products. Like this is the part that against the patriarchal commercial capitalism, and reject strict beauty standards, which actually is a heavy duty being beautiful for East Asian women, which costs them a lot of mental health and physical health and money and time. And they reject religion because they believe all religions are patriarchal. Main religions, of course, not the small clique like matriarchal religions. And they reject idol culture, like not to contribute too much money and time and etc. to male idols especially, but generally speaking, no idols. And so after we know all these things and we move basic abstract conclusion, let's move to specific topics. What are the troublemaking women in China trying to do? The first thing is to remove the mountains on their head. Like Chairman Mao has said, that there were 3 mountains on people's head to be removed. And actually on Chinese women's heads, there are more mountains to be removed, because on top of that, there are men. And so first thing, the first thing that the feminists, Chinese feminists deal with is, of course, male violence. And I don't know how familiar you are with the high-profile cases in the past years in China, but I think they were all covered by international media, starting from the sexual harassment case of Xianzi, who is a student who was sexually molested by a China Central TV station anchor who's very, very famous and powerful in China. And she was sexually harassed by him. She started a high-profile kind of campaign against the sexual harassment, and then she sued this guy in the court. And I think she started this in 2018, yeah. But then the recent ruling, the final ruling from the court, I mean, in 2022, last year, there was already a ruling, but then she appealed. But in the end, her case was dismissed. So this was a very high-profile case. And then there was a small red chamber case, which shocked many, many of these well-educated worldly girls who were educated in foreign universities and Western universities. And in this case, several young women, actually, we actually don't know the definite number, but at least 10, a dozen, more than a dozen of them, was used as sex slave, as well as egg farms and surrogate mothers for powerful people in Shanghai, including high-level officials in the district and police officers. And so that was 2 decades of dark stories, which was only reviewed into 2020. And among them were one girl who was educated in the UK, and she returned to Shanghai to look for a job, and the Shanghai Law Channel was recruiting. And she went there for an interview, and she was recruited, but instead of being a TV journalist, she was sent to this little red chamber and became a sex slave and egg farm. So that was outrageous, and many young women were woken, like shocked by this, shaken to their core, and that added to another round of outcry, of course, on the internet. And many young women told me that this case has turned them into strong feminists, strong believers of feminism. And then we have Peng Shuai, who's she's not world champion, but world class, the top rank of tennis player from China. She published an open letter in 2021 telling people about her being sexually exploited by the former vice premier of China. And that was also high profile cases, but then that was immediately removed from the internet. She was made to come out later to act as if nothing happened. And very sad story. Then you have the chained woman, who was a woman who was enslaved, sold and enslaved also as a birth machine in a poor peasant's house in eastern China. This is also a decade-long story until she was by accident found out by a social media influencer, and people started to question why she had a chain around her neck, chained to the wall. And she had 9 children. She obviously was mentally disturbed. And that case became another very, very high profile case. And et cetera, et cetera. So all these things, I can talk forever, but if I continue, then we will use up my hour. And so you see a sort of systematic male violence protected by the government as well as the legal system, so that it can continue to exploit women's body and labor without any cost. Or sometimes when the cost comes, it's either too late or it's not really just not really up to people's expectation. So the male violence can be, I mean, most of the violence happen at home. People realize that domestic violence actually is a major reason for women to die or get injured. But then there were also random male violent cases. Like during the pandemic, there was a high-profile case. A man killed a woman and cut off her head, his colleague, and put her head in front of a hotel's, like on top of a hotel's front desk. And then people asked him later, he was interviewed and asked, why did you kill this woman and cut off her head? He said, I was recently promoted. I was under too much pressure. Like, nobody can understand male violence. Like, what's the point of, like, if you lose your job, you can say you are under a lot of pressure, but you get promoted and etc. So social media has provided these, like a generation of young women to be confronted by the violence of male that I would say my generation of women did not have such an opportunity before. Mm-hmm. So that's why more and more women start to join this, movement calling for women's rights. And of course, then you have legal injustice, high profile cases. Sometimes you can see justice served to a certain extent, but sometimes not. And most of the time not, because somehow there is a mysterious sort of system in Chinese legal system. When it comes to the court ruling, then the judges normally judge a lot of factors, take many factors into the consideration. One of the factors probably is how much trouble will it bring if I rule this way or that way. So normally women are the victims. If they die, then died. So like, but the living ones might create trouble. So they tend to rule the male culprits would get less sentence, generally speaking, unless this case has been very, very, like created very severe social consequences, they call it. Then you will see For example, there's this Tangshan gangster case when they randomly beat up women. Like first they sexually harass the woman, and then when the women fall back, these gangsters beat up these women. And rumor have it that they died actually, but the government somehow just said no, they didn't die. But nobody had been able to interview them or etc. So we don't know what happened. So in these high-profile cases, then you have gangsters sentenced to 11 years. But then you also have, for example, women who were abused to death by the husband and the husband's parents. And in the end, they get like 2 to 3 years. And one of them is only also with probation. So legal system has lost the trust of women as well, if they really paid attention to all these cases. And in this year, the severe case is this Sichuan woman who was abused and to handicapped. I mean, she was beaten so much that she will never be able to, she was so severely injured that she will never be able to, I don't know how to say that in a more civilized way, but should normally. So even then, she was not allowed to divorce when she filed for divorce case, because China now imposed some sort of quota on how many people can divorce, so as to safeguard the basic cell of the society, which is heterosexual families. And it is considered, heterosexual families is considered the foundation of the national development, for the foundation of the nation's progress and social harmony. And this is put on a stress by the, I mean, the importance is stressed repeatedly by the President Xi. So we can understand the desperation of the younger generation. Other mountains that these feminists in China want to remove from their head: education and job discrimination, which is out there, like just very, very, very obvious to everyone to see. And it doesn't really bother them. Like the law would say you should have equal right, but then in reality, you don't. University college recruitment, you would see 30 to 65 points differences when they recruit male students and female students. For example, if you are male student, you can enter this college at 545 points, while a girl has to have 580 points to enter the same major and college. It's not only because, I mean, for example, you can say in science, technology, some of these subjects, they might prefer male students because there are heavy labor work involved in the later stage, which is not always the case. Even in foreign language studies, you also see that. And then there are, of course, job discrimination like everywhere else. But in China, you can just get asked questions like, are you married, or how many children do you have, in the job interview? And this is not considered like against the law, even though it is against the law. But then it's very hard to get these companies punished for it. And especially after China abandoned the one-child policy in 2016, now every woman might have more children than one. In the past, if you have one child already, the company would say, okay, you already have one child, I can recruit you because you don't have other child coming, so you will be working just like men without any, how to say, mother's leave. But now it's not sure anymore. So there are more and more obstacles created for women in the labor market. And as in new economy, you also see this coming, because if people know the size of China's new economy is actually stunning. For example, this case, the Wei Ya, who is the #1 sister, she's called, of live commerce in China. She can attract, I mean, live commerce is like you are an influencer. So you sell goods to people and people immediately buy it after they watch your live broadcast. And this is very Chinese. This is like, I've never seen it elsewhere. And it's a very successful model in the previous years. So Wei Ya was like #1 sister of live commerce because she could sell in one day 1 billion euros worth of commercial products. So, I mean, women took advantage of the new social media, as we call it, live commerce economy, because they were good at expression. They are very, quick in multitasking and etc. So they were the major force in that frontier. And then there is #1 brother, of course. He sold more, but then generally speaking, women were more successful in that. But Wei Ya suffered a downfall, a sharp downfall a year ago or 2 years ago. She was suddenly ruled that she was evading tax. And then she disappeared. She just disappeared. You could say, okay, it's her fault why she has tax. Why did she evade tax? But everybody evade tax in China, everybody. And we just guessed that nobody liked a woman being so rich and out there to dominate this platform. So only the #1 brother left. The #1 brother also made actually much more severe mistake because I think it was 2 years ago, he was on live broadcast and like show selling stuffs on June 4th, which is a super sensitive date. But then he was so ignorant that he was selling a cake, as you can see, a cake in the shape of a tank. That could send someone to jail, because you could say that he was implying of the Tiananmen massacre. So he was immediately kicked out of the broadcast room. However, he returned. I mean, his mistake was forgiven. But then women's mistake was not forgiven. So this is very obvious sort of thing that only the young women in China will notice. And of course, then you have this feminists online. They would there are different accounts, of course, feminist accounts. They would list this injustice sort of measures by the social media, by platforms, by how to say, employers and etc. They were fighting systematically this. For example, there is an ID called 监察大队. 监察大队 is to like surveil on the discrimination in the Chinese society. But of course, that is just a sort of hopeless effort that they keep on making. And then, of course, after the public sphere, all these more or less futile fights, but then it's not completely futile, but somehow not so effective fights that the feminists launched in China. The fights this time of the feminists moved into the private sphere in a much more successful way. And this battle, the first battle that the feminists now fight is filial piety, which means the full devotion and obedience of the children to the parents. And it's, the foundation, very foundation of Confucius society, called 孝道. And 孝道means very different things for men and women, because women have to shoulder, like everywhere else. I mean, in Western society, we have seen data that reflect the same phenomenon, although to a lesser extent, which is women have to pay more emotional support, do more housework, and give more, I'm not sure about in the West, but in China, financial support to their parents. So you will see that girls will actually, starting from very young age, they have to help with the household and to shoulder the emotional burden that the parents dump on their head. But sons rarely do that. And then there is a common phenomenon called 彩礼, which is well translated by some English website called the bride price. It's not dowry, it's a bride price, which means when you marry your daughter to another guy, the guy has to give you money, basically to buy your daughter. So it's called 彩礼, bride price. And that part is also a heritage of China. That is now the government is banning. The government said there should be no 彩礼, but then it's very hard to ban it still. So if you have as a Chinese daughter, unless you are lucky enough to grow up in a relatively modern family that really cares a bit more about daughters, then you will have to be the little stuffed coat, we call, or the blood bag, that also named by the feminists, of the parents, which means you have to comfort them, you have to always care for them from very young age until your parents die. And so many young Chinese women have mental health issues because of that, because they were so overburdened by the family duties and the filial piety duties that is dumped on their young shoulders. And so many of these things include, of course, the parents' demands on you as a woman. What do you need to do in your life? Like which major you should choose. For example, you should become a nurse so that in the future, when your parent is sick, then you can take care of them in a more professional way. Or you should study this instead of that, because that will take you too far away from your parents, and etc., etc. So all these sort of things, the parents can control the children much better now because there is WeChat. Social media makes sure that the parents can really send you a question every day, anytime, and you have to respond. And if you don't, they go nuts. And this is also a very interesting phenomenon that I haven't seen any sociologists studying. How the parents could control their children even across the ocean when they study in the US, and the children still got driven mad by their parents. This is very Chinese. How much time is already?
Well, we had 5 to 7, so 15 more minutes or something, 50, 20 minutes, then you're up. You can use up to an hour, that's totally fine. No worries.
Yeah, and then the other thing that that is on their head is the marriage, and that is why anti-marriage sort of movement initiatives is now very also become a genre in the social media. One of the most popular videos in the past year was under this title, "What's the benefit? What are the benefits of getting married?" And so young women, interview their parents or their aunts or random grandma on the streets, like, what's the benefits of getting married? And the funny thing is that most popular videos are these women were first stunned, and they were kind of thinking, like, what are the benefits? And then after a while, they just said, I don't know. I don't know what's the benefit. And that actually, if you really look at this video, you realize that it's actually very revealing moment, and it's actually revolutionary, because women never thought about, they would never ask this question, never thought about what are the benefits of getting married. And once they are confronted with it, they realize that they have been doing something that is not beneficial to them at all. And this kind of lesson somehow educated the young women in China. And they start to openly talk about this. And then they start to support each other's motivation, support each other's decisions to say, I'm not going to get married until I see the benefit of it. And not only that, in the past years, what we see also is the shift of the direction of the attitude towards divorced female celebrities. Male celebrities can divorce, they can get married, they can get divorced, they will never be harmed by anything like divorce. But female ones, like women celebrities, if in the past, if they divorced, they would be immediately become outcast. Like there will be so many bad negative reports about them that their career will be definitely affected. But in recent years, especially the past 2 to 3 years, you will see that when the women celebrity divorced, they will get a lot of congratulations from the netizens. And they would be, actually, they will acquire more fans. And then there will be sort of feature stories about how much they actually gain from this divorce after they divorce their very bad previous partners and etc. And then another phenomenon is the mocking or teasing or sort of even derogative discussion about romantic brain. 恋爱脑, which is a new word, also came out some years ago, 3 years ago or something, which means that you are so obsessed with getting a romantic relationship that you don't do anything else well. And that you sacrifice your whole life for romantic love. This used to be actually something very good. I mean, romantic brain in 1980s generation, it was a trend. Actually, I don't know how to say that, because after the Cultural Revolution, during the revolutionary years, there was no romantic love at all. So when my generation grew up, romantic love was a sign of rebel against this suffocating sort of monotone communist rules. But then, so my generation growing up reading all these romantic novels from the West or from Hong Kong and Taiwan. But in this generation, the young women realized that if I get too much involved in romantic stories and devote my life to romantic love, I will end up into marriage and taking care of my child alone and lose my career. And that is not going to do well, because divorce rate is so high nowadays. It's like half of the marriage end up in divorce. And then I will not end up well. And so it's all due to the social media exchanging this information. So either no matter you are highly educated or low educated, it doesn't matter. These stories somehow just educated them. And that is something also new that came out in the past years. And then, of course, children is a very, very difficult topic, because women, of course, would still find children very lovely. But then in China, we all know how difficult it is to raise a child if you don't have a lot of money to give the child the education and all the safe milk products and etc. for this child to grow up safely and well. And it's so fiercely competitive. The young women as well as the young men, they don't want that again. And so during the pandemic has played a role. I think during the pandemic, this was last year. Yeah. Last year, there was a young man who was forced by the local authority to go to we call it concentration camp, but it's actually a sort of quarantine center. And he refused. And then he told the authority, we have all the right to stay here. But the authority said, if you don't go, then this sort of resistance is a bad record that will be recorded, and your children will be affected for 3 generations. And the young man said, we are the last generation, thank you. And that became viral, like immediately people made lots and lots of different videos and memes out of this. It was like the most defiant slogan almost for a while against the brutal lockdown measures in China. But what people did not know is that actually not having children as a rebel has always been the radical feminist slogan in their principle in their movement. And long before that, they have started this, but for different reasons. Not because that they, in certain circumstances that you want to rebel against the authority, but rather because they realize that they have been hostages since they have children with a heterosexual family, within a heterosexual family. They would always be a hostage to do the housework, to nurture, and to suffer and endure domestic violence just because there is a child, then you are not able to lead that violent male. So all these things were adding to the I say not to have children kind of that movement, let's say, in China. But of course, I think this is still a small group because majority of the people who don't have children during the pandemic was just afraid that they will not be able to support the children. So it's a small group of people, feminists, that are doing this. But you still see the sharp decline of the birth rate in China, which is actually much more spectacular than in Europe nowadays. So we don't know. We don't know what contributed to it. Is it the pandemic or is it the feminist movement online? And then the last thing about children, of course, is the surname, which is something new right now, that people start to discuss why shouldn't children take mother's surname. And if you are a feminist nowadays, you would be confronted with that question always when you have a child. And that is something new, because previously it was not an issue. And once you raise this as an issue, then you see lots of men are very unhappy about it. And then you realize, it is important. It is power. And that is also a phenomenon appear in the past 2 years. And as to this beauty duty thing, I strongly recommend this New York Times report recently. It's called Chinese Woman Who Defied Beauty Duty, Buzz Cut and Brave, which means to cut your hair really short. And this is something that I see also on social media, like Xiaohongshu and Weibo, that the girls are trying to defy every standard of beauty imposed on them by the patriarchal society, especially those standards that make them weak, skinny, and childlike, which is very popular. If you see the Korean movie or the Chinese movie, you see how ridiculously white and skinny and childlike these main female characters are. And generally speaking, misogyny in general. This is very dark, actually, it's a very dark chapter. I just quickly go through it because like the first case, JM Empire. JM Empire used to be very popular sort of manga created by a Sichuan manga artist, so-called, a man, of course. And there were more than 1 million of people, males, men, subscribing to it, paying to read it. And it is full of details of violence against women to such an extent that will make you sick to the stomach if you look at the details. And I will not go into the details because it makes you sick. But then, so the feminists in China, I mean, there were lots of mutilations and killing in it, just for the pleasure of men. And so the feminists in China, they fought against this. They reported repeatedly to the authority, and took them several months finally to make it a big issue. And then the guy was arrested in the end. So this was one battle. And then there were many of these like slut-shaming slanders that made young girls commit suicide in China. And there were lots of misogynist comments in China, in pop, like trending media and trending posts that the young feminists will fight. And then to fight them, they created this misandrous words that I called so-called misandrous, like the opposite of misogyny, which is like hating men sort of words. It's not hating, but rather to counter the misogynist words, like 小浣熊, which is making fun of the overconfidence of the men in the social media. They all boast of their, I don't know, you know, manhood. and then this one is mocking their manhood, and etc. So so the young feminists nowadays, they would very often take different social media IDs and use the 小号, which is a sort of ID that they only use to fight these kind of fights, not revealing any of their personal information. Otherwise, it would be very dangerous. So it's like under disguise, they go to fight different fights, to fight the misogyny in general on the internet. And then the fun part that they are doing after all this fighting, the mountains they want to build, they are doing right now on the social media is like rebuild women's history, reconstruct women's history. For example, reviving the stories of female historical figures like Empress Cixi of Qin Dynasty, who was actually the person, the real figure who really started China's modernization. But she was sort of completely misconstructed by the historians in the next generations, claiming that she was actually sabotaging China's modernization. And then there were Wang Zhenyi, who was one of the earliest female, like she was the first female astronomist in China, but nobody knew. She was in Qin Dynasty already, among the earliest astronomers, then modern astronomers, and etc. So the young women were like telling their stories on social media, trying to reconstruct the women's story. And they were trying to correct the bias of historians who adopt patriarchal perspectives, which was later corrected by archaeologists or historians with feminist perspectives. For example, telling stories of women hunters. Actually, we have this common bias of archaeologists in the past that women didn't hunt in the prehistorical times, but actually 1/3 of the women at least participating in hunting. But the archaeologists just willingly dismissed all the evidences because they thought this woman must by mistake buried with the weapons and etc. So all these kind of systematic effort made by the feminists in China was also thanks to a generation of well-educated young Chinese women who were also educated in the West. So they were translating real time these new academic findings into Chinese and spread them in a way, like sort of in a more accessible way, like drawing paintings and drawings and telling stories and making videos and etc. And my personal favorite is this discovering matriarchal society's history and goddess worships and make it into popular art. For example, the memes of 女娲保佑, which 女娲 is the creator in Chinese mythology, the creator of Chinese people, the humankind actually. And so instead of asking for the gods to bless them, they say, okay, 女娲, bless all of us. And so there were a lot of memes like this. They are circulating as well. What they are trying to build, second, they try to get money and power, which means to get rich and to grab power, and they sort of follow cultural products, like empowering cultural products from Korea, from Hong Kong, and from Australia, and etc., to somehow establish different role models for themselves. Because in mainland China, you have powerful figures in the popular cultural products, but they always have to somehow submit to men in this way or that, or they in the end have to resign to take care of the sick parents. And that is somehow set up by the censorship department storyline. So so the other what they are doing is pretty much like what they do with the female history. These feminists were trying to tell different stories by, following the storyline of more empowered women. And this is something new, which is to uphold a different kind of beauty standard, or let's say idol standard, which is to create or follow women's image that are healthy and strong. Like the female figure on the left is a woman who is like almost 100 kilos weight, very tall. And now you can see how popular she is. This is like 558K people liked her video, just because she said this says that her video says, "Join my tribe, I will protect you." Hashtag matriarchal society. And this is something definitely you would not see 2 years ago. You can see how much the young women are welcoming, embracing strong female figures instead of the weak and lanky and willowy one traditional beauty standard nowadays. I mean, you can still say, that 558K is still not that much in China, but still it is noticeable trend right now. And then they were like the one on the right is Zhang Weili, who is a world champion of mixed martial arts, and she's also now the idol of these young women. The last thing right now that I notice is not yet a trend, but it will be, I believe, in the coming years, which is the sort of experiments of building up sisterhood in a practical way. Yeah, it's not easy because political movement in China, we all know, cannot survive very long if it doesn't fit into the mainstream, the party's ideology. And sisterhood in a very misogynist society has to survive a lot of obstacles, has to overcome a lot of obstacles. But there are women who are doing that. Feminists who are spreading feminist knowledge on Xiaohongshu and Douban. They form discussion groups, they form book clubs, and then also they start to have offline meetings. And I have personally also organized a very big conference earlier this year for my podcast listeners. 200 something women flew from all over the world to join this meeting, and you can see how strong this wish is. I mean, these Chinese women, they were from all the way from Costa Rica to Hong Kong to Singapore, New York, and all over Europe, Japan, and etc. So it's very, very impressive how strong this wish is to gather with women who love women and also want to really push for women's agenda. And then there are other experiments on the ground, like women-only bars and restaurants, although they keep on getting into trouble because somehow men hate that. Men don't want women to have women-only restaurants and women-only bars. And once you have that, and then they would go to the police and report and complain and say, this is discrimination. And so in the end, there were restaurants who were forced to accept male clients and etc. But they keep on, we keep on seeing new projects coming up. And then there are co-living projects for women. It's not like a women's shelter concepts, but rather like young feminists decides that they choose friends that have shared similar values and beliefs to try to spend life or certain stage of life together to replace heterosexual families. Because when you are lonely in a big city, of course you would always want to go enter marriage somehow to seek protection or support in a way. But once you have sisterhood there, you are living together, then the demand for, you know, entering a heterosexual marriage would be lowered. And I have seen several successful projects right now going on in China. And that is very interesting to observe. Okay, so that's about it. That's the end of my storytelling.